Thanks. So this is the Council of the Whole meeting. It is June 17th. We have the law director is present, as well as Councilwoman Blankfeld, Councilwoman Pardee, Councilman Gould, Councilman Rock, and we have a resident in attendance as well. The topic of this meeting is there has been some discussion over who actually supervises the clerk of council. There have been back and forth through many years, not just this current administration, but I think what needs to be done by ordinance is to actually map out what council supervises and what the administration supervises. So I'm going to suggest an option, and then I'd like to have participation from council members and the law director if they agree. Currently, the council appoints the clerk, which I don't think needs to be changed. I feel that council should be supervising the clerk when it comes to anything that has to do with council meetings, council minutes, council agendas, anything that has to do with council meetings. And that would be if there are any issues or if there are any great things that are happening, to advise the clerk of council, and also to do the performance review at the end of the year for those council meetings and anything associated with a council meeting. I feel that the administration, specifically the mayor, should be in a supervising capacity for BZA, planning, civil service, and any other items on the job description that has to do with City Hall / administration. It just makes sense. Council is not there on a daily basis to direct the clerk or to supervise her or him. And the mayor is there every day. So I'd like to take some comments from council members or the law director for their opinions as well.
Well, I'll start. So a couple things. I just got a text from the mayor that he's not attending, FYI. So the first thing is that under the charter, the clerk is a council appointment, and so that piece cannot change. In my mind, that language in the charter has always created this argument, if you will, or this sentiment from a couple of mayors that this is council's employee. And I think you've heard that refrain before. The reality is that, the clerk of council is performing the vast majority of her duties at City Hall, where the mayor works daily, and those of you on council do not work daily. And so it strikes me that it would be appropriate for the mayor to be in a position to either discipline the clerk of council for issues relating to performance, issues relating to policy violation that may be aside from performance. And what I mean there is, because they're both in the same building, the mayor could observe or hear about conduct that occurs at work that violates policy, that it might be appropriate to write the clerk up for that. And again, that's just a hypothetical. Any other sort of duty that isn't performed or isn't done well enough, but the mayor would have the ability to discipline and or conduct performance review. I don't think the mayor's authority or power in that regard should extend all the way up to termination. I think because council is hiring, council also should be the entity that fires. And there's a similar sort of construct in the Ohio Revised Code that governs non-chartered municipalities that exists for, in particular, police and fire, where the chief of the police department, for example, can discipline a police officer up to the level of, I think, a 3-day suspension. And then anything above that is recommendation only. But all of the chief's discipline that involves suspension or greater is reviewed by the mayor. So here, I think the analogy would be to provide the mayor with a degree of disciplinary authority up to a point where that authority becomes reviewable by council. So you're either accepting the discipline, rejecting it, reducing it, increasing it, so that you ultimately maintain control over hiring and firing and maintain some control over the manner in which that employee is disciplined. If you kind of play that out a little bit in any sort of termination setting, typically termination can occur for one event or one act, but it's more often the case that there are a series of things that lead up to termination. And so what you want to see is a personnel file that's papered appropriately to document what's going on over a period of time. And in a termination setting, where the mayor's recommending that the clerk be terminated, as council members, you would be able to kind of go through the file, see what was happening all along.
On the day-to-day, yeah.
What was being documented, what sort of progression of discipline occurred over what period of time and related to what conduct or performance issues. So I don't know if I've been too long-winded, but I guess I'm saying I wouldn't give away all of council's authority on this issue, but I would empower the mayor substantively.
Luke, I completely agree with what you just said. Do you have any comments the way that I split up the supervision? In terms of performance reviews on those specific things?
Yeah, my only comment would be that what we codify as an ordinance should also include some broad language so that we don't have similar arguments in the future about, well, this thing occurred, but I don't have authority to discipline about that. Because I think the process will work better if the mayor enjoys a degree of autonomy, and then as discipline becomes more serious, you kind of sit and review of whether he's appropriately, meted out discipline. So if he believes a written warning should be issued for whatever it is, he should issue it. If he thinks that a certain number of written warnings now justify a suspension, at that point, council may want to reserve the right to approve that. And so you would be going back and reviewing the file and looking at what the clerk was written up for and determining whether you think, that additional discipline is appropriate. And it would give you the opportunity to, have dialogue with the mayor about what was going on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you just said. Specifically with BZA, civil service, and planning, I think that should fall under the purview of the mayor in terms of any accolades or discipline or performance review actions. And then anything that has to do with council meetings should be council's purview. Do you agree with that piece?
Yeah, I would, again,
You would make it broader?
I would make it broader in the sense
Okay.
that, I think what needs to be clarified for the city, and you guys correct me if I'm misunderstanding the dynamics here or if people have different thoughts, but we've heard over and over again, multiple mayors say, this isn't my employee. I don't have the ability to discipline. And so you're wanting to clarify that by enacting an ordinance that says the mayor is delegated this authority to discipline.
Right.
And we can develop the contours of that. At the same time, I don't see why council should give away its own right to discipline.
Correct.
Because, there may be inertia in the mayor's office. There may be a difference of opinion on a particular performance issue. And if council wants to discipline this employee that it hires and fires, it should retain that right. So I wouldn't want to limit council's right to discipline.
Right.
That really has never been the issue. The issue is you want to clarify that the mayor, in fact, does have the authority to discipline. And then I think sort of the corollary question to that is, do you want to impose a duty on the mayor to, for example, conduct an annual performance review?
I see people nodding. I know Sue had her hand up. I had a couple of thoughts, but I know Sue had her hand up first.
Thanks, Barbara. Well, yeah, I wanted to say after all these years, I'm grateful that we're looking at codifying this, and I hope it can be written up clearly or clear enough that it makes sense. My question was around the performance review. Council hires and fires. So I don't see how it is anybody's responsibility but council's to do the performance review with input from the mayor, whether or not whoever the mayor is provides information. I don't see how we hand that over. Because again, if you're saying the mayor does a performance review, it seems to me you are a part of it. You have to really outline a lot more clearly than it sounds like you want to, exactly what the mayor is responsible for.
Certainly the civil service piece is huge, and has, if not done properly or timely, has bigger ramifications than possibly, sloppy minutes or sunshine law, which is essential, but sunshine law errors in posting a meeting timely or whatever. It needs, in my opinion, it needs to be a tandem kind of thing. Yes, council has the authority to hire and to discharge, and should have a say or an equal say, because we don't do BZA and we don't do planning, we don't do civil service. So, you've got two camps that this person is responsible to. So I think it really needs to be, I think I agree with Sue in that it needs to be council who does a performance review with input from the administration. I think, and there's a piece missing. I mean, I've certainly been in this circumstance before where I don't think it's just hire, fire. I think, and it's probably all covered in the greater piece that is that employee manual, but there has to be the whole process of trying to improve that employee's performance before you're just saying you're disciplined. So there's steps involved, and if they're not meeting those expectations that have been clearly set, then yeah, you discipline someone.
That is such an excellent point, Barbara. So you put the clerk on a performance plan,
Right.
and is responsible for monitoring that plan.
Right.
How does all this work out? I'm just wondering if you can write it so that Luke, when I hear you say broad, then I hear we're going to be back at the table fighting over this or arguing. I just,
Well,
if
you
you
know,
think you can write it, I look forward to reading it. I just have those questions.
yeah, I can write it and have you guys review it and comment on it. But you're touching on the nerve here that's, I think, current, which is that, let's just back off a second and talk about an employer other than the city.
Mhm.
They kind of come in all shapes and sizes, and you have your employers that have HR departments where they have employees who are keeping up on all the developments in employment law
Mhm.
and HR practices, and they have um, annual meetings with all of their employees, and they have forms established for all manner of discipline and performance review, and each employee has a personnel file, and if they start having an issue with an employee, they call their legal counsel and they provide all kinds of documentation. And the legal counsel is able to lay out an array of options because of the documentation that's present. Then you have employers who are vastly different from that for whatever reasons. It can be lack of resources. It can be size of the company. Um, it could be something that's more management style oriented. There are businesses that are run in a laissez-faire fashion. Law firms among them, I can tell you that. Um, Sometimes it's laziness. People don't like to write other people. They don't like the confrontation piece, and so they're not good at it, and so it doesn't happen. And then when that employer is contacting their lawyer is saying, well, your options are more limited. So taking all of that real world, scenario, those real world scenarios applying with the city, this requires buy-in from whoever is sitting in the seat of the mayor. You can provide the authority to the mayor to discipline, but if the mayor's not interested, he or she is not interested, and then you're not
Then
making.
council has the ability to supersede that the way that you're discussing it.
They do, and then the same issue applies. Does council have
So,
the time, the desire?
right,
inclination?
I guess I kind of agree with Sue in terms of when you're saying broad. Council has no authority over planning commission. Council has no authority over BZA, and council has no authority over civil service. And if something happens where some job function is not done properly, we don't have the knowledge or ability to be able to do anything in those cases, in those three specific cases.
Well, I not sure I exactly agree with that. Let me just give you an example. Let's say there's a planning commission meeting, or better yet, let's say there's a Board of Zoning Appeals meeting, and the Board of Zoning Appeals agenda contains a high-profile issue, a commercial project abutting a residential zone that's calling for some large variances that are a matter of controversy in that neighborhood. And the clerk neglects to provide the proper notice to the neighboring property owners. And the BZA hearing is conducted, and then after it's conducted and the BZA takes whatever action it takes, it's discovered that certain parties who were entitled to notice didn't get notice. That's an instance where there's a job performance issue that could be the subject of discipline. And even though it's a Board of Zoning Appeals hearing, I don't think council should give up its right, if it decides it's appropriate, to discipline the clerk in that kind of scenario, particularly if the mayor isn't going to do it. I mean, the
Because it
perfect
could
scenario would be,
it could involve something that could lead to litigation. Am I right?
sure, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's exposure there.
Thank you.
There's, you're letting down residents. There's egg on everyone's face, all those things. If the mayor disciplines the clerk in that instance, great. That seems to me to be appropriate. But what if the mayor elects not to, for whatever reason?
Yeah.
I don't think council should feel like it doesn't have the authority to step in. And obviously, the more serious the infraction, the more realistic it is that council would want to do something.
I guess the crux of the issue here is that we need to be a team. Council and administration needs to be a team. And council is not there on a daily basis, and we don't know what's going on. And these are all hypothetical situations. I'm not saying, anything is happening right now, but we need to be able to depend on whoever the mayor is, and the mayor needs to be able to depend on whoever council is for performance reviews and for discipline and or accolades. And if I'm coming around to your side where you're saying, don't give up that authority for the BZA and the planning and the civil service. I get that. However, we're not always told what is missing. I mean, if we're very on top of it, listen, we have someone on council on planning, we have somebody that's liaison to BZA. Civil service, we don't know anything about unless somebody tells us. So that's why I feel like the mayor and council together need to do performance reviews, together need to take disciplinary action. And maybe that is the gist of what this ordinance should be, as opposed to delegating responsibilities.
Hey, Luke.
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask a couple questions on a few of the issues that were discussed. You talked about, council needs to step in certain situations. And so I kind of want to start about the idea of what authority we have or don't have. Let's take the civil service examination as a point here. We've referenced the adage that the clerk is council's employee. In the way that the civil service program works, who decides when an employee needs to be hired such that it's appropriate to have a civil service examination?
Well, that's an interesting question. The civil service rules talk about the appointing authority. The appointing authority is the city. So I think the mayor as safety director is ultimately making that decision. The way it works in practice is the chiefs have identified when they have a need, they bring that to the mayor, and then the mayor kicks this process into motion.
So the mayor as the executive and his employees as his subordinates have conversations amongst themselves to decide when the civil service process needs to be enacted, and then that's enacted in part through the clerk of council.
Correct.
And so to explore the idea of this as council's employee, if we simply said, oh, we don't agree with the hiring of a new police officer, the clerk is our employee and must be utilized in order to go through the civil service process, and we're going to instruct her not to do that. Would it be your opinion that council has the authority, not suggesting that we would ever use that authority, but with the, again, simply for the purposes of exploring this idea that council's clerk is its employee alone, would you suggest that council has the authority to obstruct the civil service project by instructing its quote employee to not participate in that process or to enact the things that she must do by charter or ordinance in order to complete that process?
No, council would not have that authority, and first and foremost, I'd rely on the charter
Mhm.
for that opinion, because the civil service is delegated to the clerk in the charter.
Yeah.
I don't, I think the premise, if I'm understanding it correctly, is one that we all agree on, that there are aspects of the clerk's job that are purely administrative.
And you've actually done an analysis of this. In November or December of 2019, a conversation was had, and you were asked to do an analysis of the work that the clerk completes and design a supervisory structure to allow for the efficient supervising of the clerk. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yes,
And an agreement was had amongst the council and the administration, specifically the mayor and the vice mayor, regarding that supervisory structure at a meeting thereafter?
That sounds right, Justin. I don't know if pen was ever put to paper. I don't remember that, but
that's my recollection.
It- Yeah, it was supposed to be a joint effort in
Yeah.
terms of performance reviews. We were specifically talking about a performance review and a possible disciplinary action.
Right.
And typically a meeting was had where all participants were present. And so I bring that up in order to address the issue of buy-in. We are at a place where, as early as last week, the mayor has said, when asked about supervision of the clerk of council, that this is your employee. If you want something done, you do it. And is now not at this meeting that we set in order to discuss that. So when you discuss buy-in, this ordinance is no different in effect and authority than the agreement which was struck in late 2019, early 2020.
Mhm.
So I think it's important for this council to discuss the practicality of what we're doing. This isn't a solution to the mayor's obstruction and refusal to work with council or to do the things that he has said that he would do. We had I grow tired of coming back to this issue with Sue, who has been on council for far longer than I have. I mean, has said back in 2019, we were having this conversation back when. Here we're having it now. We finally came to a solution, and now here we are again.
yeah,
So
I think
I'm less
And
inclined
to your
support
point, Justin, Sue just said, and she's been on council much longer than you or I, that this is not the first or the second or the fifth time that this has been a concern or discussed.
So at the instant intersection that we find ourselves in, I'm actually less interested in creating an ordinance which clearly this administration has no buy-in into. He's just not interested in it. He's said it clearly. I mean, I leave open the opportunity that perhaps something else came up, and that's why he's not at the meeting tonight. Wasn't aware, had something else come up. I mean, he has a lot on his plate, and he's the administrator of a city. Things come up, and you can't make meetings. But if you take, last week's statements as any indicator, he just doesn't want to do this. And so, how do we, as council, create a structure for us to supervise and provide accolades to and discipline, if necessary, our employee without the administrator? Sorry.
We have to just remember, thank you, Justin. I think that's a point well taken. We have to remember this is going to be for future mayors also, not just this mayor, because the previous mayor also had this issue, and I'm pretty sure the one before that did too. So this gives guidelines so that, this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, this is actually an issue for this mayor and the mayor prior. Before that, it wasn't an issue. So Justin's points are well taken. My final question was going to be, do you really think this will make a difference? I think it's sad that we have to
it's hard to say. One thing I would.
Can I finish real quick?
I'm sorry.
I want to say, I think it's sad that we have to codify things, put in ordinances to compel things to happen. And my question was going to be, if whatever mayor is in charge does not want to take part in doing this, I don't see how we have any real power to compel. I mean, there may be an ordinance, but what are we going to do? We can't, I appreciate trying to clarify the structures,
Mhm.
how this works out, because this is a shared employee. I think that's important. And I think the work that's already been done is helping. And I'm happy to read something. Luke, it sounds like you think you can put something together, but I'm a little skeptical too. So thanks.
Well, I can put something together. I guess the question in my mind is whether, you think that by codifying what amounts at least to the delegation of authority to the mayor, you create some accountability. Because right now there's nothing that you can really point to that creates accountability for him or for anyone who occupies the
Yeah.
seat. And anytime it's come up in the past two administrations, council has heard the same thing. It's your employee. I can't.
Mhm.
And I think the conversation changes a little bit if you're saying you've been given the authority, you're in charge of managing employees at City Hall, and that includes the clerk
Right,
by virtue of this ordinance.
right.
Then
And
it
include, yeah,
least
includes
gives
the
it
clerk
something to
because
talk
there
about.
are there are portions of her position that clearly are not council driven or council approved or administrated.
Luke, I appreciate the remarks that you just said, and I think that is the direction that we should
Mhm.
go.
Mhm.
And let's take a stab at a draft. It doesn't have to be an emergency at the next meeting. It could wait till September, but I
Yeah.
think it's worth putting pen to paper for the accountability point.
I appreciate that because our prior tries haven't worked. Luke, I hear what you're saying, and I like that. It does provide accountability. And we can do that, right? This is a kind of a dumb question for me, but he's the mayor, he's an elected official, he has powers in the charter, he has powers through the code, but we can still activate through ordinance additional duties for him. Correct. It sounds like we can.
Yeah, well, and I think in my mind, this is a delegation of authority. And that doesn't have to be exclusive to your own rights to exercise authority. It's
Mhm.
just saying he's got the right to discipline.
Mhm.
You could have part of the oddity of the argument that's been presented over time to council is you could have very different circumstances relating to performance that were witnessed by the mayor that clearly call for disciplinary action, where you would want to be able to say you have the right to discipline and you should have discipline. I'll give you an example. We have provisions in our policy manual that relate to harassment of all sorts, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's harassment by virtue of name calling. If you have a clerk, again, hypothetically speaking, who's engaging in behavior that violates that kind of policy, and it's witnessed by the mayor or reported to the mayor, because again, he's the head of the city, he occupies an office at City Hall, that it should be clear that the mayor would write the employee up for that behavior.
I think it could be something as simple, not something as dramatic as that, but something as simple as attendance. We don't know. We're not
Well,
there.
Yeah, and again.
Okay,
But I think to the point of liability, however, Luke,
Yes.
there are situations where an organization, an entity, is required to step in to make certain, disciplinary action, to take disciplinary action to stop certain things from happening. And if the mayor's current position is that he's unwilling to step in and do those things on behalf of the city and its citizens, then
It
we need to
opens
be
you
really
up.
clear about that. Because if there was a huge situation like you just brought up, a harassment issue, a whatever it is that has really serious legal consequences for us as an entity, and we have an administrator who's abdicated responsibility for that individual, and we don't have a clear understanding of what's happening there, then the city and its citizens are opened up, to a liability that I don't think we want to be.
That's
And so
absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. There could be, and it's foreseeable that at some point, it might not be for 20 or 30 or 50 years, but that there will be a need for an investigation.
Okay, so I think we're all on the same page. Are there any other comments?
Only a request, Luke, would you please review your emails and memoranda from Q4 2019 and Q1 2020 for a detailed structure of the administrative and legislative responsibilities of the clerk and a written agreement as to how those authorities and supervisory lines will be delegated?
Yeah, can you repeat those dates one more time? Was it 2
Sure, the meeting-
19?
The meeting was had at the end of 2019, December of 2019. In response, Councilwoman Pardee emailed late in 2019 a job description that was built off of Nancy English's time as clerk. You then utilized that job description to further create the current job description and memorialize those functions which in your purview were legislative or executive in nature, and created an agreement amongst council and the administration, specifically the mayor and the vice mayor, to share in the supervisory responsibilities of the clerk of council.
Okay, yeah.
Which is
Okay.
why I feel sometimes like I'm being gaslit by the time we get back to, hey, this is your employee, when I know we had very
Yeah.
conversation.
I clearly remember that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just to be frank, the mayor and the law director in this specific circumstance actually met with the clerk.
Mhm.
So it's not that there's no precedence here either.
Yeah.
But okay, so just in the interest of time, first of all, I would like just to take a vote that we give the law director the go-ahead to put a draft together for the first council meeting in September. If we can all just say aye or nay.
Aye.
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 Aye. Great. Is there anything else, Luke, that you need from us before we adjourn?
I don't think so. I'll try to, circulate what I'm working on for comment prior to that meeting,
Okay.
so that you've vetted it before it goes on the agenda. But that gives me plenty of time and, yeah.
Okay, great. I want to thank everybody for participating tonight and have a good rest of the evening. I'm sorry, Sue?
That
Oh.
was great, Michelle. Thank you
Okay.
for doing this, though. Yeah, bye.
I just want to adjourn the meeting. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
All
Aye.
right, thank you so much. Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you, everyone. Be well.